Okay, this video is going to go over our server implementation project. So far, we've been doing things with very good guidance. At least I think very good guidance. There's been podcasts that go over pretty much exactly what you need to do. So if you take the time and follow along with the podcast, you should have no trouble making the things work. But now for our final project, I'm going to give you a little different kind of guidance. Basically, some config guides and some sample files, and I'm going to see what you can do. And the reason I'm doing this is because in the real world, when you get a job, they're hiring you for a reason, and they need you to be able to do things. I tell people all the time, in most of the jobs in our field, they have problems that need to be solved. And if they already had the solution to the problem or had the time to solve the problem themselves, they would not have hired you. So you're going to get hired and they're going to say, hey, here are the things we need you to work on. And they want you to go away and work on those things and come up with some solutions. They don't want employees that are needing constant direction and basically need your employer to solve the problem for you. So figuring things out for yourself is a very valuable skill in this field. So what are we going to do? We're going to make our server a DNS server. Basically, I have a guide that tells you how to do that and some sample files. So the guide tells you how to install the DNS packages. It tells you to get the sample files from D2L. It tells you which files to modify, and you need to modify those files to put your domain-related information and your IP address-related information into those files. And you need to start the service. That's the config guide, and here are a couple NSLookup commands to help you test if your server is working. So that's the DNS part. The next part we're going to do is we're going to implement a Linux Apache MySQL PHP web application. You've already installed Apache, so now basically you need to install the MySQL PHP part, and you need to download the code. I'm giving you the code to make this work. Here's where you can get the code from. You're going to have to download that, extract it, and I gave you the MySQL commands to make your server work. I also put some additional hints for the database portion in there because historically students have done things that they need some help with. Database language and interacting with the database isn't necessarily intuitive, but these hints will hopefully help you out. And then I give you the commands to run to configure the database, create the tables, create the user, give the user privileges. So that's the LAMP part. We're going to implement SSL for your web application. So basically you're going to get a certificate signed by my certificate authority. I'll give you a little extra help, a little extra information on this just to make sure that we are all on the same page. And there's one important thing I need to tell you. So the config guide for SSL gives you commands to generate some certificates. If you have already taken CNT 220 or are currently taking CNT 220, we're generating certificates a little differently in here. We're generating the keys and certificates using the OpenSSL commands to generate them instead of using the gen key. So basically we're going to run all of these commands, 1 through 7, and that's going to generate some files. Right, these are the files it's going to generate. Server.keys, our private keys, server.csrs, our certificate signing request, and I don't know if the server.cert gets generated now. You're going to send your CSR to my certificate authority, and I'm going to sign it. So the way you send it to my certificate authority is you connect to ca.cnt.lab/certserve, and you do request certificate. You want to do advanced certificate, and you're going to cat the server.csr file, and you're going to copy and paste this in. You're going to want to get the lines that start with begin certificate and end certificate, and you're going to paste that in, and you're going to submit. And it's going to say your request ID is 297. You need to submit a support request asking me to sign your certificate. Once I sign your certificate, I'll email you back saying I signed your certificate. Do not kill this browser window. If you kill this browser window, you will not be able to download your certificate because Firefox clears your cookies when you kill the window. So once I've told you that your certificate is ready, you hit home, view the status of pending certificate request, and then you'll click on this, and it'll tell you that the certificate's been signed, and you can download it. So then you'll have your certificate. Once you get your certificate, then you need to copy the keys into the right place. This guide tells you where to copy the keys to. You have to modify your SSL.conf file. The config guide tells you how to do that. So that is the SSL part. So once you are done, you should be able to go to your web page by domain name over HTTPS and get the right certificate back and not get a warning. If you hit an access address book, it should show you the address book. You should be able to add things to the address book and submit, and that adds it. So that proves, if you can do all these things, that proves your DNS server is working, that proves your MySQL database is working, your web app is working, and it proves that your SSL certificate is correct. I will have to log onto your server and make sure your firewall is correct, because this doesn't prove your firewall is working properly. This would still work if your firewall was not on. But if you can make all these things work, then that is the majority of the project. That gets you all the way up to security standard item number 2. We're going to install NTP date command, and you're going to use cron to have the NTP date command run every hour and update the time from time.nist.gov. There's a link to the document with some cron examples. You're going to implement remote logging to a log server at 192.168.240.242. Tell you what file to modify. There's basically an IP address at the bottom of the file, a sample IP. You need to put this IP in there, and then you need to make sure it's using UDP for logging. There's some @ signs in there that tell it whether to use UDP or TCP. You need to make sure you have that setting proper. That's set properly to use TCP. And then you're going to use Yum to install any updates before you ask me to update your server, to evaluate your server. So that's the first part. How am I going to grade the first part? Well, basically I'm going to make sure everything works. Here's the point values everything's worth. 15, 20, 20 for DNS, web app, and SSL. The remaining security standard items, NTP, remote logging, and system has been updated. And then I'm going to reboot your server and make sure everything still works. So that's important, because if you look at the config guide, it says modify the server settings to make named start at run levels 3, 4, and 5. Same thing for MySQL. So if your server does not work when it comes back up from reboot, you'll lose a few points for that. The last thing on the project is that you need to connect to this server, 110. Use the username student, password rich is the best with some crazy characters. And then you're going to evaluate that server for compliance with my security standard. Right? My security standard. I thought I fixed that. Yeah, there's a link. Basically, this is a security standard we've been working with. The system must operate at run level 3 with no graphical user interface. You'll need to get on to that server, 110, and look at the settings of that server and see if it's running at run level 3. You need to see if the NTP server is set up to, if it's set up to synchronize with the NTP server. You need to see if it's set to log remotely. Basically, you need to check this server to make sure that everything we've done through modules 7 through 10, and including the project, to make our server compliant with our security standard. You're going to need to evaluate whether or not that server is compliant with the security standard. And for each item, you will list whether it's compliant or not. And then if it's not compliant, you'll list the recommendations to make it compliant. So, for example, it says the root user must not be able to log in directly. If you look in the sshd.com_config file and find out that root is allowed to log on remotely, you'll say a server is not compliant with this item. In order to fix it, you need to modify the sshd_config file to set the permit root logon to no, or whatever the actual setting is. So that is the second part. One other thing about the project, there's a due date. Two other things about the project. There's a due date, and then there's a final due date. So I give you a few extra days if you don't get it done by the due date, but you lose 5% for each day that it is late. So keep that in mind, that the due date is like 3 days before the final due date. For full credit, you need to get it in by the first due date. Also, I will deduct points if I have to help you too much. What does too much mean? Well, if you ask me questions about things that you should know by now, then you will lose a couple points probably. I quite honestly haven't really taken many points off for this. So don't let this deter you from asking me questions. It's much better to ask me questions and get projects done on time than it is to worry about losing a few points for asking for help. Very rarely have I actually had to use this, and that's been on the order of magnitude of people asking me 10s or 20s of questions about things. If you ask 2 or 3 questions, you'll probably be fine, unless your question is like, "Hey, I got in the VI editor and I don't know how to get out." Yeah, that's probably something you lose some points for. So I think that's about it. It's not really that complicated of a project if you've been keeping up with what we've been doing all semester, and I think it's kind of fun to actually do real world type things. So hopefully you will too. Good luck.